the What Really Happened radio show. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Wednesday, January 20th, 2016, middle of the weekday, hump day, starting a long, slow glide down to Kaahumanu Friday, and another hopefully relaxing weekend. It's a crazy day out there. We have got so much to report on. We're going to be going really fast through the show today. Phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Starting on out, more and more people around the world are noticing this media blackout on how effective Russia is in Syria, destroying ISIS targets. They got 600 over this last weekend. Nobody wants to talk about that. Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov had another meeting with Secretary of State John Kerry, basically saying that Islamic State and al-Nusra will not be part of the proposed Syrian ceasefire, as Russia is going to simply annihilate them. They're not going to be around any longer. Translation, the U.S. doesn't get its puppet regime in Syria after all. That's the message that is coming on out. There we are. So people are saying, what is ISIS going to do? Oh, those poor ISIS people, what are they going to do? Well, they could go to Hollywood and make beheading movies. They're really good at that. There's concern that they might actually decide to target Saudi Arabia. And that's not a really big surprise, because even though Saudi Arabia has been loyally supporting the United States agenda in the Middle East, overtly and covertly, they're also an oil-producing nation. And they need to be brought back under U.S. control to make sure that oil is always sold for the U.S. dollar. And so if the U.S. gets itself kicked out of Syria and Iraq, yeah, why not go into Saudi Arabia? It's not like the United States ever shows a lot of loyalty to countries that are their friends. Look at Germany. Friend at war. Friend at war. Friend now? Who knows what's going to happen? Last year, the United States dropped 23,144 bombs on Muslim countries. That's 60 bombs a day. And every time they drop another bomb, all it does is anger those people into joining the terrorist groups that really do hate us. Now, Russia is planning to respond to the naval force deployed into the Black Sea by NATO by deploying some of their new weapons. Now, there's an interesting little wrinkle here called the Montrose Convention, which controls who can and cannot go into the Black Sea. And if you are not a nation that borders the Black Sea, there are strict limits from this international treaty as to how many ships you can have in the Black Sea, especially military ships, and how long they can stay. But NATO apparently has decided that they are above international law and treaties and agreements. Now, an interesting story appeared over at INFOWARS talking about a declassified email sent on April 2nd, 2011 to then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton confirming the reason Libya was invaded was to prevent Gaddafi from turning the gold dinar into a pan-African currency that would displace the dollar. When I wrote the article, All Wars Are Bankers' Wars, I put in there, this was the most likely reason. You were all told that we were saving those poor Libyan people from an evil dictator who was torturing them and killing them, short-sheeting their bunk beds and giving them wedgies and everything. But no, it was all about the threat of a value-based currency, the gold dinar, to this house of cards paper U.S. dollar, which is rooted in debt. We're going to grab ourselves a real quick phone call here. John in Texas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Johnny there. Going once, going twice. All right, we're going to let him go there. Now, following the war on Libya, it has now been established that $7 billion worth of gold that was to back the gold dinar and silver went missing. Gee, I wonder, where that would have gone to. But that's what it was all about. Let me see here. I need to do, I'm sending messages to our control room here. All right, now, getting on up to Iran. As you know, ever since the incursion by those U.S. Navy boats into Iran, the U.S. has been changing its story. The original story was, it was mechanical problems. Then, of course, Iran sent the boats back, minus the GPS navigation equipment, and the boats are in perfect working order. So then the Pentagon said, well, it was a navigation error. They didn't know where they were. And Iran has basically come out and said they've tested the GPS systems, and both of them were working perfectly. These sailors knew they were in Iranian waters. They were at that island, Farsi Island, on which there is a Navy base. They were probably spying, or more than likely, this was an attempt to provoke Iran in the hopes they would either fire on these U.S. boats or hold these sailors permanent prisoners, a new hostage crisis, in order to justify the United States reneging on lifting the sanctions. And the Iranians didn't bite. Fed the sailors, sent them back, turned the ships back over, left the U.S. nowhere to go. All right, let's see if we've got John in Texas now. Are you on the air? On the line, rather?
Hello.
There you are. Okay.
Okay, yes. I had, sorry, how are you doing, Mike? But I had, something that went on in my town that is very interesting. I think 2 weeks ago there was an attempted robbery, and it was an elderly couple walking down the street, and two people got out of their car. And luckily for the elderly couple, the man had a gun and shot the guy, and the guy's in the hospital, and that's that. But it's interesting because I live in the south part of Texas. We don't see that. You don't see that type of stuff. That blatant getting out of the car and trying to rob somebody. That you don't see that. We hear stuff like that, in Latin America because, they have real strict gun laws. It's like Southern California over there.
Yes.
Because it's so expensive to get your permits that it might as well just be illegal. Most of the people can't afford it.
Well, to the gun grabbers, they think a woman lying raped and strangled dead in an alley is somehow preferable to that woman explaining to the police how her rapist got shot. I don't know why they think that, but that does seem to be their attitude.
But I really think they're trying to make it because I think California has been like the experimental ground for all these things, and Southern California is very corrupt when you come into like the narco trafficking and everything. They got their people in the Southern California government, and they use the drug money for that. But the only reason they're able to do that is because there are no guns in that area.
Or organized crime. Organized crime wants a gun ban because it makes it easier for their street level workers to take more money. I mean, anti-gun is pro-crime. And there's nothing new with that. Actually, Chicago was held up as the model of gun control for the United States, and of course it's turned into a disaster because they have the highest per capita gun murder rate in the entire country. Because the bad people always get guns, and they can go out and use them because it's like the entire city is a gun-free zone. They know that nobody's ever going to shoot back at them.
Yep, and that's why also, because, the illegal immigrants, the immigrants that came here, that come here, that come from over there, be quite honest with you, they are pro-gun. Be quite honest with you, they are. Because when you hear stories, and I got friends who come over there, even the news, remember the 43 students who were killed in Mexico?
Yes.
So they were killed because they were just asking for donations for their college. The mayor of the town was like, called her husband up and said, get these people out of here. I don't want them here. The mayor called the local criminal organization to pick them up, and then they picked them up, and then those people were brutally murdered.
Yeah, it's getting harder and harder to find that line between organized crime and government, and that's not just in Mexico.
There is no line. There is no line.
All right, John, thank you. We got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the phone call, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Pardon me. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. So, article coming out of Sputnik News asking the obvious question, is Washington hiding the truth behind the U.S. Navy incident in Iran? Obviously they are. They're changing their story back and forth. The original story's been proven an outright lie. And look at the timing. It happened early in the day of the State of the Union speech. This was going to be Obama's headline, we've got to go to Iran. Iran can't be trusted. And And, of course, it fell apart because Iran said, oh, yeah, well, yeah, it was a simple mistake. Here's your people and your boats back. Didn't fall for it. And look at John McCain's reaction. He's furious that the Iranians didn't torture those U.S. kids. Because he can't use smiling, healthy, happy kids coming back home quickly. He needs Iranian hostages that he can rail about. Over in Great Britain, their government is delaying the lifting of the sanctions they put onto Iran, claiming that there are some laws left by the Tories that basically say they can't lift the sanctions on Iran because it's been declared a global supporter of terrorism, forgetting that it is the U.S. that was caught setting up and funding ISIS and Al-Qaeda. But you know something? I'm sorry, not Great Britain, Canada. This is in Canada. Canada can change the laws. They're just stalling because Israel still wants Iran to be destroyed and they can't be allowed to have their own money back. Anyway, over in Great Britain, the polls are starting to shift dramatically in favor of separation from the European Union. And now we're getting word that if there is a Brexit from the EU, Scotland is going to mount an independence referendum again. Now, remember the last one they had, the election fraud, they didn't even try and hide it. It was wide out there in the open that the election was stolen to keep Scotland enslaved to Great Britain. So I'm sure the Scottish are going to be a little bit more vigilant watching those people counting those votes. Meanwhile, if you want to know the hidden hand behind all this push everything together into larger and larger clumps we can make money on, Goldman Sachs just made a large donation to the pro-European Union campaign, giving them all kinds of money to convince everybody you want to live on a one-world government and we will loan all the money into circulation and keep you all debt slaves forever and ever and ever. That's the real pitfall right there. The New World Order global government comes with a global, privately owned central bank to make us all debt slaves forever and ever and ever and ever. Now, over in Israel, their defense minister is in high dudgeon. They're out there frothing at the mouth. They're not getting the U.S. war against Iran they've been hoping for. And the defense minister actually came out with a really bizarre statement saying that he's far more afraid of Iran than of ISIS. And on reflection, you can understand that when you realize ISIS is a manufactured creation of the United States and has never once actually attacked Israel. Now, Netanyahu, as you know, fought tooth and nail against this Iran deal. Went before a joint session of Congress. It was an absolutely shameful display of our elected representatives cheering and clapping and standing ovations and, oh, yes, all hail the mighty Bibi Netanyahu. And it was a huge, humiliating, embarrassing experience for the American people to see our elected representatives who are supposed to be taking care of this country just out there saying, yes, we will throw other people's children onto the Iranian bayonets for you, oh, mighty Netanyahu. Well, now that the deal has been put in place and the sanctions are starting to be lifted, Netanyahu is reversing course. Over at the Huffington Post, they've got an article where Netanyahu is trying to take credit for the Iran deal going through. Oh, yes, this is a good thing, and, you know, I did all the good stuff here. I mean, what drugs is he on, and why isn't he sharing those? But the Iran deal and the sanctions is still a complex issue because the United States has already thrown new sanctions onto Iran over the fact that they have ballistic missiles, which is perfectly legal for Iran to have. It's just another convenient excuse. The justification is that if Iran has ballistic missiles and they get a nuclear bomb, then they're a threat. And everybody is still out there screaming that Iran is a global sponsor of terrorism, and there is not one iota of proof. Certainly in comparison with the proof that the U.S. is sponsoring ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra, all of the Israeli false flags, and nobody's buying this stuff anymore. This is what's getting really interesting. Over at Russia Today, they're denouncing the U.S. government's announcement of an investigation into Russian meddling in the European Union. And they're saying it's going to be a farce. It's going to be another, let's say bad things about Russia. The U.S. is very concerned that China is starting to have growing influence in the Mideast. It's a threat to us. Actually, what's going on is U.S. influence around the world is on the wane. It is plunging right alongside that U.S. dollar. And obviously, other nations are going to step into those vacuums, whether it's Russia or China. This isn't an attack by Russia and China. It is the U.S. government self-destructing because of its love for private central banking and its refusal, its failure to see why that system inevitably will crash the nation. Now, tensions between the U.S. and Israel continue to escalate. Apparently, Netanyahu, one of his aides, described the U.S. ambassador as a Yehudon, which is, little translation is a little Jew boy, but it's an insult. It's basically a term used to disparage Israelis who are not seen as pro-Israel or pro-Jewish enough. You know, you're soft on the goyim. And so the situation's continuing to escalate here. Let's see. Israel has announced plans to seize more West Bank farmland. They're not even coming up with a justification. They're just saying, we want it, we're going to take it. What are you going to do about it? We got nuclear weapons. Now, do you remember at the start of the second invasion of Iraq, the U.S. literally sent $12 billion in cash to Iraq. It arrived on pallets, shrink-wrapped in plastic. $12 billion. It's gone. Nobody knows where it went. And the government doesn't care. But they can't come up with money to guarantee safe drinking water to the people of Flint. You know, they can pay to put fluoride in there, but can't pay to take the toxic stuff out. Does this sound like good government to you? Does it sound like wise management? I don't think so. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, we're going to talk about the economy, and as you are no doubt already aware, it was a rough day on the global stock markets, starting with the Asian markets last night. At one point today, the Dow Jones was down over 500 points, and toward that last hour, we could clearly see the plunge protection team trying to shove the market back up, only to see it drop again before the close. And the reason for that is simple. Everybody knows the market's being rigged. Everybody knows the stocks are overvalued. The old wisdom of the trend is my friend doesn't work anymore. People are selling those rallies. Every time the PPT shoves the market up, everybody's saying, okay, now's my chance to get out and get as much of my money possible as I can. A few more days of this, there will really be a panic. I'm sure that Wall Street is trying to do a controlled descent. But because everybody knows the market is overvalued, they know that in a major sell-off, only the first people out will get their money, and everybody else is going to be left with an impressive-looking number on the bottom of last month's brokerage report. Now, do you remember on the State of the Union address, Obama came out saying anyone claiming that America's economy is in decline is peddling fiction? And a lot of people were laughing at him for that, but it turns out that Obama was engaging in a time-honored tradition of shoveling the bovine excrement at you, the American people, when the economy is going into the Al-Qaeda. And there's this wonderful little article, we've linked it at the front page of WhatReallyHappened.com, and it's basically 1927 to 1933, a chart of pompous prognosticators. Politicians and bankers who were telling all of you everything is just fine, everything is going to be great. I'm going to read you a few. I'm not going to read the whole list. You got to go get in, and some of them you're going to start laughing. Quote, we will not have any more crashes in our time. That was John Maynard Keynes in 1927. Just 2 years before the big whoopsie. Let's see. There may be a recession in stock prices, but not anything in the nature of a crash. That was Irving Fisher, leading U.S. economist, New York Times, September 5th, 1929. Less than a month before it came unglued. This is the time to buy stocks. This is the time to recall the words of the late J.P. Morgan that any man who's bearish on America will go broke. Within a few days, there's likely to be a bear panic rather than a bull panic. Many of the low prices as a result of this hysterical selling are not likely to be reached again in many years. This is R.W. McNeil, quoted in the New York Herald Tribune, right after the crash of 1929, just trying to get people, throw their money back in, drive it back up again. And I'm going to skip on down here to the very bottom, and this one is germane to us today. Quote, all safe deposit boxes in banks or financial institutions have been sealed and may only be opened in the presence of an agent of the Internal Revenue Service. President Franklin D. Roosevelt, 1933. Okay? So if you want to know what the government is thinking about doing, just go back and look at what they did the last times this happened. Now, as the oil prices continue to plunge, a lot of oil and gas companies are heading towards insolvency and collapse. And the banks and financial institutions that invested in them, sold their stock, are in serious trouble as well. 27 U.S. coal companies have been forced into bankruptcy over the last 4 years. DuPont just cut 24% of their Delaware workforce. Now, the economist who predicted the Lehman crash, William White, chairman of the OECD's Review Committee and former chief economist for the Bank of International Settlements, has said the world is facing a wave of epic debt defaults. And yeah, the numbers are all down there, but behind the debt defaults there lurks the real monster, the derivatives, the credit default swaps. The exposure there runs into the hundreds of trillions of dollars. Gee, I wonder who they think they're going to get that money from. Because we know what this government does. We live in a fascist economic dictatorship. When the banks get into trouble, they drop the losses on you, the American people, because that's what you're here for. It's the only reason the government lets you live, is to come up with money and breed new workers and soldiers. Otherwise, they'd get rid of you quick. Another article coming out from Activist Post talking about the international war on cash. And as we see capital controls start to materialize, that's going to be on the list, where you will not be allowed to have currency or coin in your pocket. All of your money has to be in some computer's bank somewhere. All transactions are by plastic card. That way there can't be a run on the bank. You can't go to the bank and say, give me my cash. Oh no, cash is illegal. We'll just shuffle it around someplace else. It's ours to take. Remember, a little over a year ago, Congress changed the legal definition of a bank account holder to an unsecured investor in the bank, meaning you are expected to share the losses when the bank gets into trouble. And I had somebody who wrote in to say, I don't need to worry, all the bank accounts are protected by the FDIC. Well, that's the theory. But when they changed the banking laws, they brought those derivatives back under the protection of the FDIC, and they have a higher priority than your bank accounts. And the FDIC can't cover these losses. It's just not going to be there when your accounts are taken. It just won't. The FDIC has already said if the bank is taking your money because you're an unsecured investor, that's not a default and we're not responsible anyway. The last official act of any government is to loot the nation. We're there. And I'll make one more prediction. At the same time that they ban cash, they're going to have to ban investment metals in the hands of ordinary citizens. Otherwise, we go down to our nearest coin dealer, swipe the little plastic card and say, give me the entire balance in gold and silver coins. And they can't let that happen. They need the gold and silver to prop up the banks, to make good on all the gold repatriation requests coming in. Oh, no. The new model in the United States of America, the government doesn't think you can be trusted with cash. You might be a terrorist. You might be dealing drugs. You can't be trusted with silver and gold. You must be engaged in money laundering. Latest analysis of the Trans-Pacific Partnership predicts it will cost almost 500,000 U.S. jobs and contract the U.S. economy, like it needs any more help on that one. Okay, capital controls are coming, and basically it's an all-you-can-steal buffet. They are changing the laws to allow the banks and the government to just grab whatever they want from you. And remember that final quote I gave you from Roosevelt from 1933. They did it. They locked everybody's safety deposit boxes so they could help themselves. Now, over in Saudi Arabia, they're in serious trouble from the oil price war. They were happy to crush Russia when the U.S. asked. Didn't realize there were going to be consequences. Neither did the U.S. Look at the devastation it's caused. Oil companies in trouble, fracking companies in trouble, although we're not going to miss those. But everybody who invested in the oil companies, they're losing their shirts. Article over at Activist Post. The U.S. is at the center of this global economic meltdown because it's all centered on the U.S. Federal Reserve note and the Federal Reserve, a privately owned central bank that loans the public currency into circulation at interest, thereby piling up more debt than actual money. The debt is always greater than the available money supply. That's why you can never get out of their trap. And this leads, of course, to another article over at APFN reminding us that there are 545 people who are responsible for all of the globe's problems right now. And that is, of course, the members of Congress and the President. Got to take a break for commercials. We got some people on the phones, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're still talking about the economy. And over at Investment Watch blog, they have an article where Rubini is out there saying the economy is slowing down. The Federal Reserve might have made a mistake. No, the Federal Reserve was the mistake. And here's something that you need to understand. 100 years ago, when a corrupted Congress and a corrupted president sold us back into the slavery of the same predatory banking that we'd fought the revolution to break free of, they knew somewhere down the road it would destroy the nation. But it would be long after they were gone, after lives of wealth and privilege and comfort and power, and they didn't care what happened. Somebody else's problem. Well, today it's our problem. Everyone's trying to say, oh, this is it and this is it. No. Private central banking is inherently unstable. There is no way to make it work forever. It has to come to an end. It's a pyramid scheme. Now, because you've got a population of 330 million Americans, you can make the Ponzi scheme last a very, very long time, but it still has to come to an end. And every nation enslaved to a private central bank is in exactly the same misery. That's not a coincidence. It is the inevitable outcome of allowing a privately owned central bank to issue the public currency as a loan at interest, instead of treating the public currency as a public utility, which was the original model that the United States started with. Article coming out of RINF.com, global poverty is soaring. But you can relax because the 1% and their pet Congress critters are doing just fine. So it averages out, really. You know, we're a very wealthy nation here. And yes, all that wealth is in 5 or 6 people at the very top, and the rest of us are going hungry. But overall, we're doing fine. All righty, let's see. Monsanto has terminated 16% of its workforce as demand for GMO continues to plummet. Johnson & Johnson has had to cut about 3,000 jobs in their medical device division. So let's talk about the candidates and the campaigns because, you know, we're in the election year. The circus is underway. Unfortunately, they're letting the elephants go. But it's still going to be a circus. Send in the clowns. There have to be clowns. All right, first clown up. Hillary Clinton just got an endorsement from the United States' largest LGBT organization. That's going to backfire on her because the Sanders campaign is reminding everybody that Clinton once supported an anti-gay marriage bill. So now there's another Hillary Clinton flip-flop on full display for everybody to see. Hillary Clinton also won the endorsement of the mayor of Flint, Michigan. I don't think that's going to really impress a lot of people. For him to come on out and say, oh, yes, Hillary Clinton, she'll run the country as well as I'm running the Flint water supply system. Not too surprisingly, Hillary's doing very well in the polls. We mentioned yesterday WMUR, Manchester TV Channel 9, shows Bernie Sanders a 2-1 lead over Hillary Clinton. Now, former presidential candidate, government insider Bob Barr, is now making the rounds. When the Chinagate scandal happened, when Bill Clinton was selling U.S. military secrets to China in exchange for campaign donations for his re-election campaign, Bob Barr tried to do something about it. And unfortunately, all of the Clintons' buddies were saying, no, you can't do that. You can't touch the Clintons. You'll wind up suicided in Fort Marcy Park. But he tried to do it. And that's now a current topic because of what's been going on with Hillary's email server. Pardon me. Another story out of Investment Watch blog. Hillary's server is the biggest breach of American secrets in our history, and nothing's being done about it. I'm in agreement. We don't know how bad it is because Hillary deleted a lot of emails that nobody has seen. And I'm absolutely convinced that there are grounds to suspect that Hillary was repeating the 1996 Chinagate scandal, selling U.S. secrets for contributions, using her private email server with weak security, and using her charitable foundation to collect and launder the payments. Now, this latest scandal, that some of the emails that have been discovered contained above top secret special access program intelligence, is raising the stakes. This stuff is so secret, the investigators needed to get special clearance just to look at it. Now, Hillary Clinton is out there insisting that none of this stuff was classified when she got it. That's nonsense. Special access program intelligence is classified the moment of creation. And she's out there saying, this is a conspiracy between the Department of Defense and the Congress. They're all out to get me. It's the return of the vast right-wing conspiracy. And for our younger listeners who don't know what I'm talking about, the term vast right-wing conspiracy was used by then First Lady Hillary Clinton back in 1998 as a catch-all dismissal of all the scandals that were coming up about herself and President Bill Clinton, including the murder of Vince Foster, the Monica Lewinsky affair, Chinagate, Travelgate, Whitewater, Cattle Futures, Travelgate, all, no matter what you said, oh, that's just lies from the vast right-wing conspiracy. And the term quickly became an object of ridicule, satire, and abuse. So if Hillary is trying to bring back the vast right-wing conspiracy, to me that's a sign her campaign is in trouble and she is panicking. Now, Hillary needs to be in the big house, not the White House. And I still want to know if Hillary was using her weak private email server to sell U.S. government secrets and collecting and laundering the payments through her charitable foundation. That's a question that needs to be answered. It deserves an answer. And we're not getting it. We're getting silence from the government and the corporate media on that. Okay, we're going to grab a phone call. John in Barbados. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. Going back to the previous subject, I think people now are aware of what this, or a large proportion of people are aware of what this private central banking system has done. Both Europe and America, and well, most Western countries, in fact. And I would suggest that the Rothschilds and their ilk better be on Mars when they start stealing the money.
Oh, that's not far enough. We can reach Mars. I know. I did it when I was a kid. We can get them on Mars. Okay.
Yeah, but I mean, the people of that ilk, when they start stealing the money, people will get really, really upset. And I would suggest that if they're not on Mars, there's going to be a lot of dead bankers littering the streets of Europe and America.
Well, you know, at this point, I am less interested in vengeance on the money junkies as I am freeing planet Earth from this usurious debt slave system. Because the early United States showed there is a better way for the people and of planet Earth as a whole. The private central bankers have held the world in their debt slavery for 300 years. They've become insanely wealthy. I think they've made enough off of the labor of the people. And if you really think about it, their model of private central banking, it's just another form of feudalism, where they own all the real assets and everybody just works to keep them in wealth and power. We need to break free from that and go back to the model of economics the United States started with, which allowed people to enjoy the benefits of their own labor and not have it constantly siphoned away by the elites.
Well, I think we're going to have to wait for that collapse before we make the move. But unfortunately, Gaddafi of Libya made the move too early and was promoting a gold-backed dinar or a gold dinar.
Yeah,
and got squashed.
Yeah, and now the emails coming out of the investigation into Hillary's server have confirmed that. I remember when we first put that out there, and I was getting all these emails saying, "Oh, don't be ridiculous. Gaddafi was an evil dictator. He was a tyrant, had nothing whatsoever to do with the gold, blah, blah." Now we got a confirmation. Yeah, that's what it was all about. It was all about the money. It was another war for the bankers.
Well, I tell you what, the people of Libya now are suffering greatly compared with when Gaddafi was in charge. Everybody was housed.
Everybody living in a nation with a private central bank is suffering. Period. End of discussion. Going to have to let you go here, John, because we got to take our top of the hour news break and commercials. Thank you for the phone call. We'll be back with hour number 2 after these brief words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open. 877-300-7645. Tom is sitting in our control room, his hand hovering over the phone, ready to swoop on down and grab that, put you on the air with your comments and questions. We're talking about the race for the White House. And we're talking about how it's turning out very different than a lot of people expected it to. More and more people in the Democratic camp are now saying it's no longer assumed that Hillary Clinton will be the Democratic nominee come November. Now, Hillary Clinton has made a tremendous strategic mistake by bringing her husband Bill Clinton into the campaign trail. First of all, it's not working because up in New Hampshire, where Bill Clinton is stumping for his wife, they only had 100 people show up. Contrast that to the crowds that are showing up for Donald Trump. But the real problem is adding Bill Clinton on the campaign has revived all of the scandals of the Clinton presidency and governorship and made them current events. And coupled with Hillary Clinton's statement that victims of sexual abuse have a right to be heard and a right to be believed, except that trailer trash scum, that those sluts who accused my husband, has brought all of that back up again. And this is a good thing because a large part of Hillary's current support are young women, emphasis on young, who for the most part were completely unaware of this history, of the Clinton behavior, of Bill Clinton grabbing anything in a skirt and Hillary covering up for him. And now they're resurfacing, and it's starting to erode Hillary's support with young women because they're going back and they're looking at the huge amount of material that's out there. And the official campaign slogan is all of these women were completely discredited. You know, they were all liars. They were part of the vast right-wing conspiracy. And yet everybody sooner or later runs into the fact that Bill Clinton did settle out of court on the Paula Jones lawsuit. And they're all beginning to make fun of Hillary's comment that no individual is too powerful to jail. Don't worry about it, Hillary. You actually do look good in orange. Okay? Now, we have this video surface from 2007 when the U.S. was just starting into this economic disaster, where Hillary Clinton was out there telling Wall Street, none of this is your blame. You didn't do anything wrong. It's all the fault of those people who bought homes they couldn't afford. Blame the victim. Yeah, it was Wall Street's fault. Wall Street came up with the mortgage-backed security fraud, was a huge seller in the beginning. They needed more mortgages to front load onto that, so they were teasing people in to get mortgages signed without checking whether they were qualified or not. They broke the securitization chain. The people selling those mortgages could care less whether the people signing the paper could make the payments or not. They just needed more mortgages to put into the bundles to sell as investment vehicles on Wall Street. And it was an absolute disaster. Yeah, it's the fault of Wall Street. It's the fault of private central banking. It's the fault of Washington, D.C. for forgetting that their job is to take care of the nation as a whole. And Hillary, in this video, demonstrates that as president, she will be on the side of the money junkies against you. More fascism. And we cannot afford any more descent into fascism in this country. Alrighty. Now then, we've been talking about the WMUR, Manchester TV, Channel 9, having Bernie Sanders ahead of Hillary Clinton 2-1. CNN has a new poll out saying exactly the same thing. He is way ahead of Hillary in New Hampshire. Too far ahead for vote stealing to reverse. Remember, when Hillary went into the New Hampshire primary against Obama, Obama was ahead, but only by a few percentage points. And then the next day, there was this sudden come-from-behind triumphant victory for Hillary Clinton. And the results didn't match the exit polls because obviously the voters were lying to the exit pollsters. That was the excuse that was given. But Sanders is way too far in front for vote stealing to reverse what is turning out to be a landslide. Article coming on out of RIMF.com, Sanders supporters optimistic as he continues to surge in the polls. Another article out of IowaPoliticsNow.com. For Sanders, Iowa is chance to turn revolution into reality because he is ahead in the polls in Iowa as well. You know, Sanders' down to business demeanor is resonating with the American people. He's not a big, flashy, I've got star power as a politician. People are getting sick and tired of that. Now, a lot of people are still scratching their head about Sarah Palin offering her endorsement to Donald Trump, which she has the right to do if she thinks he's best for the job, and she's out there on the campaign trail with him, stumping for him. And a lot of people are trying to say to Donald Trump, you need to be careful because remember what Palin did to the McCain candidacy. But, you know, Palin still has influence among some conservatives who aren't really paying attention to what's going on. She still has a little star power, Caribou Barbie. I hope that Palin doesn't think Trump is going to tap her for the vice presidency to prove that he is pro-women, because that would be a mistake. Sarah Palin single-handedly destroyed John McCain's campaign for president, and she'll do it to Trump. Now, up in Iowa, Governor Terry Branstad is saying that Cruz should be defeated in the coming caucuses. Now, his concern, of course, is that Ted Cruz has opposed the federal ethanol mandate that benefits Iowa's agricultural economy. They grow a lot of corn up there, and a lot of that corn is sold to the ethanol producers. Now, we know that this ethanol gasoline idea was another spectacular failure. It sounded good in the press releases, but it hasn't really penciled out. And it's bad for older cars. That ethanol will dissolve your fuel systems. And the new, EA15 that's coming on out, brand new car makers will not honor the warranty on the engine if you use that ethanol gas mixture. It's that bad. But the governor is out there saying that Cruz will be defeated in the caucuses because, you know, he wants to end that ethanol subsidy. And maybe that will work against him. But one more time, and please take notes because there's going to be a test next period. Ted Cruz does not satisfy the constitutional requirement to serve as president. He is not a natural-born citizen. And natural-born, contrary to Cruz's supporters, is defined, was legally defined at the time the Constitution was written, as meaning born inside the country. The natural-born requirement for the presidency was proposed by Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John Jay, who laid it on out. The intention was never to have a president who was not born inside the United States of America. It doesn't get clearer than that. And I'm getting all these emails from Cruz's supporters saying, well, what about this and what about that? You know, George Washington wasn't born in the United States because the United States... If you read the Constitution itself, instead of Ted Cruz's talking points, there is an exception in there to allow people who were born before the creation of the United States to serve as president. That's irrelevant at this point. Ted Cruz was born in Canada. Ted Cruz was born in Canada. Ted Cruz was born in Canada. He can't be president. And under the 12th Amendment, he can't be vice president either. Them's the rules. Marco Rubio has the same problem. Yes, he was born in Miami, but neither of his parents is a U.S. citizen. And it is amazing how the party machinery could care less about the Constitution. And that's one of the reasons this nation is in such a terrible condition. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And I'm looking at Fox News, and they're running this story, Will Sarah Palin's endorsement help Donald Trump? And they're already shaking their heads and wagging their fingers. The GOP establishment does not like Donald Trump. He's not one of the chosen. He's not one of the elect. He won't do what he's told to do. He's a maverick and an outsider, which is why we love him, and the GOP insiders hate him. And illustrating that, apparently GOP consultant Rick Wilson was being interviewed on MSNBC and described Trump supporters as, and this is a quote, childless single men who masturbate to anime, end quote. So Rick Wilson has basically taken political discourse in the United States of America and driven it down to the level of a first-grade play yard fight. You know, your mother dresses you funny. Your dog smells bad. That's pretty out there. Now, interesting little article over from Bloomberg. What kind of a man spends millions to elect Ted Cruz? And they're talking about Robert Mercer, who's very wealthy, doesn't like a lot of attention, and he's what is described as a reactionary Republican. And he's supporting Ted Cruz's campaign to the tune of millions of dollars. I think more important than asking what kind of man spends millions to elect Ted Cruz is you have to ask, why didn't this guy check if Cruz is actually eligible to be president before blowing all that cash? It is a reminder that having a lot of money doesn't necessarily mean you're smarter or more intelligent than anybody else. It just means that people will respect your idiocy a little bit more if there's a paycheck connected to it. Now, a little bit of sad news. We reported yesterday on how a van carrying campaign workers for Ben Carson had an accident in Iowa, skidded on the ice, and one person was seriously injured, and unfortunately, that person has passed away. And Carson is still putting his campaign on hold while they deal with the family, and it's sad, and these things do kind of happen. All right, we're going to go ahead and grab a phone call from Mo in Florida. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Thank you for taking my call, Michael. I just, sometimes I think just watching your show, helps me keep my sanity. But sometimes I think we get so caught up in the minutia of everything, and you look at the candidates, and you look at Hillary Clinton, and all you have to do is look at that video with her giggling and laughing when Gaddafi, who was once the friend of the United States until, as you well know, he wanted to get off the dollar and get on the dinar and gold backing of its currency. But how she laughed and giggled. What kind of a human being? I saw this. I was up in Colorado at the time skiing, and I happened to come back, and I was looking at the TV, and I watched that, and I wanted to throw up. And I don't know how we get caught up in all these other things, and how can somebody vote for somebody that's like somebody watching a baby being tortured and laughing. I mean, this was a guy that the United States, when you saw Rumsfeld shaking it, he was the hero, and he was our, stalwart, and they called Libya was called the Switzerland of the, of the African continent. And
okay, well, there's a couple of things going on here. Okay, first of all, there's the phenomenon of groupthink, where if the people around you think it's a laughing matter that Gaddafi was killed, you may tend to go along with it. Remember the Sidney Milgram experiments? Okay, most normal, moral human beings will go along with an authority figure. And we saw that tragically when the torture scandal first broke. And I said at the time, if you allow yourself to get dragged across that moral compromise, you are going to be stuck. You're never, ever going to be able to turn around and go back. And a lot of people did. Yes, let's torture them. And now, of course, they're some of the most fanatical supporters of the government. The government must be right, because if the government was wrong, then I was wrong to support the government. And a lot of people don't want to have to face that crisis. I mean, this is part of how populations get manipulated to go along with this sort of thing. To me, that video is appalling. Unfortunately, there are people who are still caught up in the U.S. is always right and everybody else is always wrong who think that's perfectly acceptable behavior. It's a dwindling minority, but they are out there. For me, the reason why we cannot allow Hillary to be the president is based on a wide variety of reasons. First of all, her obvious preference for propping up Wall Street at the expense of the American people, which is in that 2007 video. The constant history of corruption, of all the dead bodies that piled up around the Clintons. I mean, the Clintons seem to be the king and queen of organized crime in this country, and we've already had one in the White House. And I think the one thing we can point to about Bill Clinton that nobody argues about is that he literally looted the retirement funds of the American worker to get his magic budget surplus, which was then promptly spent on a bunch of other stuff. And, you know, the Democrats like to say, well, see, Bill Clinton had a budget surplus compared to all those other Republican presidents. Well, those Republican presidents weren't looting the Social Security Trust Fund. And that's really what it comes down to. And, you know, the Clintons are always about taking care of the Clintons. And these are very dangerous people. I don't want Hillary in that White House. I mean, this country is already hanging by a thread as it is. And another Clinton in the White House is going to be the death blow for this nation.
You're so right, Michael. I like I said, you helped me keep my sanity. You know, and you're talking about the FDIC, the very small fraction they have is as a reserve to back up the trillions in derivatives. Yeah. It's a joke. Once the panic starts, like your song says, the panic is on.
Yeah, the reality is the FDIC was set up to provide insurance in the event of a few banks failing. But if the system comes down as a whole, there absolutely is not enough money in there. And we know what's going to go on. The Federal Reserve will go into the computers and type up trillions of instant dollars for themselves. And we'll wind up like Zimbabwe did, carrying around paper notes that say $100 trillion that are going to be worth less than the toilet paper. And, you know, inevitably, when a private central bank gets into trouble and there's no other private central bank to bail them out, hyperinflation is going to happen. They're going to do everything they can to hang on to their wealth and power and privilege, and they don't care if everybody else gets destroyed in the process. In fact, it makes them feel better, because part of the psychology or the psychopathy of the money junkies is they can't feel how rich they are until they can look out the windows and see everybody else dirt poor. Okay? We got to take a break for commercials. Mo, thank you for the phone call, and we'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, there's been kind of an interesting little event going on here. As you're probably already aware, Sean Penn went on out and was able to find the drug lord El Chapo and do an interview with him, and basically showed the power of citizen journalism and scooped the world's major corporate media outlets. Now, you would think the corporate media would be on top of this story because El Chapo is a spectacular figure. He's had spectacular escapes from prison. But no, the corporate media are out there attacking Sean Penn. Say, who do you think you are? You know, you're an actor. You're pretending to be the corporate media, and they're smearing him practically for having done this. And what's going on here is, up until now, corporate media has sort of looked at citizen journalists and the independent media as this little annoyance that buzzeth around our ears, and we can ignore them with dignity. But now that somebody with Sean Penn's star power has joined our ranks, corporate media is very, very nervous. And they are trying to find some way where they can get journalism back under their control. And they've already got a nose under the tent down in South Carolina, where they've proposed a new journalism registry law, where if you are a journalist, you have to register with the state of South Carolina, which then gets to decide if you are or are not a journalist. That's state-controlled media right out there in the open. And they have a right to be panicking because over at Investment Watch blog, another story, people trust search engines more than traditional media for news. The U.S. public relations firm Edelman polled 33,000 people in 28 countries and found people trust search engine results more than any other corporate media. Now, we know search engine results are now starting to be filtered. Google is doing it. Google is biasing search results in favor of the official story. But there are other search engines coming online that don't do that. And they're going to start whittling in to Google's preeminence. All right, we've got a couple of phone calls waiting on the line. Andrea in Oklahoma, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha. Anyway, you were talking about the FDIC bank and talked about bad banks. What about the HSBC bank, which did all this laundering of money and selling drugs and slavery and prostitution and murder and on it went. They caught him and then they let him go. It was almost a pat on the back. Good job.
Oh, yeah. If you're a banker, you're above the law. I mean, it's almost like the game Monopoly and the get-out-of-jail-free card. By the way, speaking of Monopoly, have you noticed that the tints applied to the new U.S. currency match the colors of the Monopoly money for the same denominations? Anybody who doesn't think the Federal Reserve has a sense of humor, you just need to look at that.
Yeah, that's not funny.
Okay, I thought it was a giggle.
Anyway, but you are funny. Honest to goodness, our senators, our representatives, and we've talked about this before, at any point could take $1 billion and solve all this, what's going on at any moment and buy the Federal Reserve back and put it back in under the government's hand and do something about taking our government down.
But they won't do that because the financial centers of this country are very generous campaign donors, and the laws have been whittled away where they can just write as big a check as they need to keep the American people their slaves. And the only way we're going to get out of it is we're going to have to let it destroy itself. And you should all be taking your money out of the banks. You should be closing your savings account because they're wide open for confiscation. You should be dumping your stock portfolios right now and, getting into silver and gold and keeping your money under your own control. Start delinking. Stop putting your money in the system for them to play with.
I'm almost hopeful that somebody takes the grid down. If they took the grid down, then maybe people wouldn't be using credit cards. They'd have to go back to money. And you have Dave Ramsey and all these people that call in, and they're so excited about being debt-free, but they did it with money. They didn't do it with a credit card, and that's his biggest philosophy. Maybe if we got him on board, because he is a big mover and shaker.
Okay, let me come in on here. I think taking the grid down would be a really bad mistake, because it would give the government an excuse to say, oh, well, we were just on the verge of turning the economy around, and this was an attack by Russia or Iran or whatever. We're just going to have to nationalize everything, and, we will give you a little bit of money to live on, and we need to get the rest to get the economy back together. They would use it for their own interests. Okay? We need to let the U.S. economy self-destruct and take the federal government down with it, and then we have to stand united. When some carpetbagger comes in and tries to restart the same system, we're going to say, no more private central banks. Anybody proposing a new privately owned central bank in charge of the public currency needs to be tarred, feathered, hanged, drawn, quartered, burned at the stake, and then the ashes peed on by a rabid wombat.
Well, I'm with you on that, all that.
Okay.
But the thing is, I'm afraid that they're taking it too far, that it's all going to go to plastic, and everybody's going to these Apple Watches and something smaller, and it's all combined into something small on your hand, and eventually they'll go, let's just get rid of all that because you keep losing it. We'll just embed it into your hand.
Oh, well, I'm sure that's coming. I'm sure that's coming as well. Listen, I need to let you go here. I want to fit in one more phone call before we go to the commercial break. Randy in Indiana, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello there. Hey, Mike. Corporations use presidents, we all know, for various purposes, and they bring this puppet in and that puppet in for various results. Mm-hmm. Just as they brought Obama in to destroy and demonize government, but Obama destroyed the collective trust. He destroyed the thought of any tax-paid dollars for the preservation of human dignity more than any president has in 100 years. So, I mean, they've used them. And Trump, I think Trump is an insider. And I think that the danger of this guy is with his tough talk, if he gets in, the corporations are going to use him as a tough leader, and they're going to take us to the worst war we've ever seen.
Well, I disagree. I'll disagree with you for this reason. Trump is an economic insider, but if he becomes the president, nobody's got a hold over him, because he's financing his own campaign. The corporations can call him up on the phone and say, please give us that, and Trump's going to think about it and say, I don't think that's a good idea, and that's going to be the end of the discussion.
And I would certainly hope that's the case, Mike, but I'm just saying, there's no way to prove it, but I'm just saying, I think that he's an insider, we're being duped, and he's going to, and with his tough talk that everybody is in touch with.
Okay, who's the real outsider then?
I don't think there is one.
Well, then let's just stay with Trump and call that insider status a push, okay? All right. Thank you very much. We're going to let you go. All right. I love it when people call up and say, well, Trump is this, okay? Is there anybody who is not? Well, no. Well, then it's a push. It's not worth talking about. Let's focus on the point of differences between Trump and the other candidates. That's where we focus, and that's where it's important, and the American people are listening to what's going on. Like I said, there is a tremendous anti-incumbency, anti-friend of Israel fever that's going to sweep this nation this election season. I think it's a good thing. It may actually allow us to save this country if we can do that. All right, got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And up in Oregon, of course, the standoff is continuing between the American people and the land grabbers. And interestingly enough, Lou Dobbs came in on this with the observation that the law under which the Hammonds were given these very long prison sentences to drive them out of business so the BLM can buy their ranch was a law intended to punish domestic acts of terror. And that was never proven. The issue is a backfire that was started to halt a brush fire, and it succeeded, but it did scorch some public land. But that's not an act of terror. At the worst, it's carelessness. They let the fire get a little more out of control. It's not an act of terror, but the government hit them with a terrorism charge and threw them in prison so that their ranch will go out of business and be sold to the Bureau of Land Management for pennies on the dollar. It's a land grab. It's what it is. It turns out Judge Grasty's brother is an agent with the Bureau of Land Management. It's just an entirely, incredibly corrupt system. So let's talk about immigration, because the refugee crisis is not going away even in the midst of all the economic turmoil. They are predicting 4 million more migrants will reach Europe by the end of 2017. IMF is increasing the forecasts amid the mounting crisis. Apparently, Dutch politician Geert Wilders was trying to make a speech in this tiny village of Hirsch about how the town is going to have to take in 500 refugees, and prompted the villagers to just riot. They stormed the town hall, said, no, we're not going to go along with this. Tensions are very high. The Dutch Prime Minister, Mark Rutte, is saying the European Union needs to sharply reduce the refugee numbers. That this has become a problem. Now, what's really interesting is we have the supporters of allowing refugees cross all borders claiming that anybody who objects is a heartless, cruel person. You just don't understand. These people are suffering. But it is not heartless to refuse entry into your home of someone who may be a criminal, contagious, or a terrorist. It's just common sense. What I am not seeing anywhere in these discussions about the immigrant-refugee crisis is criticism of the heartless U.S. government whose wars of conquest have created all these refugees in the first place. Why is nobody talking about that? If you want to solve the refugee crisis in Europe, you do it by pulling the plug on these U.S. wars. There's a wonderful little video by a member of the Swiss Parliament who's out there just saying, enough is enough. You know, we have a right to our identity, our regional, cultural, historical identity, and not just have all these Middle Easterners and Africans poured all over us in the hope that it's going to dilute us so we can't stand up and say, hey, we're Swiss anymore. There's a surge of nationalistic fever all across Europe and here in the United States of America. Macedonia has closed their border with Greece to all migrants at this point. A social worker working in an asylum center in Hamburg, Germany, went public saying 90% of these people coming across the border are unpleasant, they're liars, they're groping women, they're threatening to behead people that don't do what they want them to do. This plan to blend us all together into one massive humanity, except for the Israel, which has to maintain their racial purity. But the rest of us all blend together so we'd forget who we are, lose our national sense of identity, regional sense of identity, our cultural, historical sense of identity. There's been a war on all of the symbols of who we are and where we came from. The war on the Confederate flag is a good example. They want us to forget who we were so that we'll all link arms with our brothers and sisters and sing Kumbaya and work ourselves to death for the New World Order masters. Not exactly working out. Apparently, German Chancellor Merkel is heading to the snowy village of Wildbad Kreuth in the Bavarian Alps today. Those are beautiful. I've seen them myself. Unfortunately, she is sharing the accommodations with a huge number of critics of her immigration policy from within her own political camp. She's losing her support. She's losing domestic support. She's losing EU support. And that's important because up until now, Germany has been seen as the European Union's flagship state. Yes, Brussels is in charge of the European Union, but everybody was always looking to Germany as setting the tone and the policy and certainly with the economic burden for the rest of Europe. But that is starting to fall. Now, the European Union President's confrontational approach to EU countries' policies outside of protocol is starting to alienate the leaders of those European Union member states. And we are seeing more and more indications the European Union could fracture from this refugee migrant problem, even before the economy tears it apart. We are seeing the result of policies set in place on the basis of a casual conversation at a cocktail party, but not thought all the way through. There's a dearth of careful analysis as to what these policies are going to bring about. It's wishful thinking. Oh, we'll drop the borders and blend everybody together, and they'll be friends and with everybody, and then we'll have this one global mass of human laborers, and they won't care who they are anymore, and they'll salute the New World Order flag, and it'll all work out great. Sounds wonderful. Let's do it. Didn't think it through. It's become a common feature, certainly in the U.S. government, of not thinking things all the way through, and then acting surprised by the result. Over at the Veterans Affairs, a former hospital director was apparently paid $86,000 to resign ahead of a whistleblower going public saying that he didn't actually do any work. Now remember, we have a real problem with the Veterans Affairs hospitals not taking care of the veterans. One office alone has 40,000 backlogged paper applications because the VA's real agenda seems to be ignore the wounded veterans in the hope that they'll die off and stop being an economic burden on the war machine. Because if the VA really wanted to do their job, they would have started making significant structural changes when this scandal first came to light well over a year ago, but they haven't. The General Services Administration apparently designed a $75 million federal law enforcement facility that was so poorly designed that the intended federal law enforcement agency couldn't use it when it was completed. Does this sound like good government to you? Doesn't to me. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call. Bob in Massachusetts. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Bob in Massachusetts, are you there? Going once? Going twice? All right. Up in New York, there's a peace activist grandmother, almost 60 years old. She was arrested for photographing a peaceful war protest against drone warfare outside a base where the drones are piloted remotely. And she's been given 6 months in prison. The pilots of the drones who are murdering 20 to 40 innocent bystanders for every single suspect, of course, get to go home tonight to their families. Does that sound like good government or wise management? Doesn't to me. All right, let's talk about the gun grabbers. They're out there in force, and they are failing miserably. 2015 set a brand new record for the number of background checks requested for the legal purchase of firearms. And, of course, that doesn't address the issue of how many illegal firearms were being bought or how many people are building guns. It's a legitimate hobby to build guns. So every time the gun grabbers come on out there and say guns are bad, gun sales go through the roof. Another story down in Georgia, homeowner shoots and kills home invaders after they beat him and pistol whip his mother. And again, the police didn't show up until it was all over. The police are never there to thwart a crime. When a crime or an act of terror happens, there are only two parties, the perpetrator and the victim. And if you want the crime and terror to stop, you must allow the victim to have the means to protect themselves. And a gun-free zone sign doesn't cut it. We'll be right back after the news and top-of-the-hour commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. We went into the news break talking about gun grabbers and how it's backfiring because the more they talk about taking away the guns, the more the American people want to grab them. Now, over in Albuquerque, the police there are celebrating the seizure of 1,600 guns. We have taken 1,600 guns off the streets of Albuquerque. Actually, no, what they did was seize 1,600 guns from a known gun collector. And now the man is suing, and I hope he wins. And in the blueprint for the new America, we're going to have an ironclad rule that the offending government official is personally financially liable before the taxpayers are. The system that they got now, if you work for the government, you can violate somebody's constitutional rights and you can mess around with them and you personally don't suffer anything for it other than a letter in your employment file. The taxpayers pick up the cost for the lawsuits. That doesn't solve the problem. Just makes the lawyers richer. Now, here's another example of the propaganda that's getting on out there. If you are a smoker, you're probably familiar with the Zippo lighters. It's a classic, goes very popular in World War II. There's the basic lighter, and as it became a fashion accessory, you would get them with logos, your company logo, your military unit logo, and various sayings. And there is a Zippo lighter, very popular, that is emblazoned with the words, the right of the people to bear arms. Sears is now refusing to carry that particular Zippo lighter because they don't want you to know that you have a right to keep and bear arms. They want you to forget all about it. That's why Common Core literally rewrote the Second Amendment in their curriculum to say you have a right to keep and bear arms if you are a part of a government militia, which is not what the Second Amendment says. By the way, getting on back to Sean Penn and El Chapo, another embarrassment for the ATF. One of the .50 caliber rifles found at the El Chapo hideout tracks back to the Fast and Furious program. Another little embarrassment there. You can't have guns. We're going to give them to El Chapo. We're going to give El Chapo guns. But you can't have them. Whose side is the government on? Are they working with the drug dealers? Probably. They certainly were during Iran-Contra. The biggest drug smuggler in the country is the country. And they're giving guns to one Mexican cartel to wipe out their competition so that they can make more money off the drugs being smuggled into this country and sold to your children. Now, we reported on this yesterday. A federal judge has struck down President Obama's claim of executive privilege over documents related to Fast and Furious, because the public has a legitimate right to know why the same government that insists we have no right to have military-style weapons is spending our tax dollars to give those very same weapons to Mexican drug criminals. And second, because there is no such thing as executive privilege in the Constitution. It's a made-up phrase for presidents to try and get out of embarrassing little details, revelations. And in the past, a lot of judges have gone nudge, nudge, wink, wink. Yes, I accept your claim of executive privilege because you're the president and we shouldn't challenge you. Yeah, we should, actually. That's why that First Amendment is in there. We have a right to criticize the government and to tell them when we think they're full of bovine excrement. We, the people, have a First Amendment right to tell the government to go to heck. Now, Freedom Watch on Monday has filed a legal challenge against Obama's executive order on guns, which has ordered the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms to reinterpret laws passed by Congress to change their effect. And the president tried to justify this by saying he was closing what he called a loophole that allowed certain sales to occur without a background check, except those sales don't exist. When he made his statement about the executive order, he made a couple of flat-out lies. He claimed that you could buy guns over the Internet without a background check. That's absolutely false. If you buy a gun over the Internet, it is sent to a federal firearms licensed dealer near you, and you have to show up and go through the background check to take delivery. That loophole doesn't exist. I got an email the other day, saying, why do you think you need 30 rounds in a gun? And I wrote back, because the Second Amendment wasn't written so we could go deer hunting. Over in Midlothian, Texas, police witnessed a murder at the Illusions nightclub at the Richmond Inn and just basically sat there and let the murderer get away. And these are the people that we are being told we should just wait and trust to protect us when the criminals break into our homes. By the way, speaking of criminals in homes, a very interesting story came out of Alt Media Daily, quoted from the Daily Sheeple, rather. There was this incident where federal police officer, his cops tried to attempt to rob him and his wife under the civil forfeiture laws. And they brought out a police dog, which we know will alert on a signal from the trainer, not because they're actually seeing anything. And they stopped this couple. They said there were drugs in the car. They were going to confiscate the vehicle, and they didn't realize the guy they were trying to do this to was a federal police officer at the Marine Corps Air Station in Miramar in San Diego. So it's kicked up a big stink. And it's reminding everybody that the police departments of the United States are stealing more from the American people under the civil forfeiture laws than criminals are. And they're murdering more innocent Americans than the mass shooters and terrorists put together. And it's out of control. And it's not just in this country. Up in Montreal, story makes you wonder what the heck is going on. Police stopped this pregnant woman and confiscated her car because the registration was 6 weeks late. And they just abandoned her there. Pregnant woman. Made her walk home in the snow and cold. Now, the Canadians are not as nice as I remember them being when I was up there. And I have to wonder, are the Canadian police also being trained by these Israeli security firms? Because it just doesn't seem to make any sense. Alrighty, let's talk about codes and encryptions. GCHQ very thoughtfully provided to the public a voice encryption standard for cell phones. See, we're going to make sure that your privacy is guarded. Not too surprisingly, Dr. Stephen Murdoch of University College London has basically said there's a massive backdoor in this, as there is in any government-provided authorized encryption system. And if this guy can find it, criminals can find it. Far from making us more secure and safe in our communications, all of this backdooring by NSA, GCHQ, all of it has left us wide open to be preyed on by real criminals who are not the concern of NSA and GCHQ. In fact, I got another nasty email from somebody when I was saying, proves how NSA is impotent against real criminals and terrorists. And I got this letter saying, well, the NSA is after terrorists. They can't be bothered looking for criminals and cyber criminals and the rest. No, their focus is on saving the United States from acts of terror. No, they can't find the real terrorists and the real criminals because they can write their own systems of encryption. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're talking about computers and all the problems that come with them. Now, you've probably seen commercials on TV for all these games where you can download and play for free. Well, not exactly. You can play the basic game for free, but to do better, you have to buy assets for real money. And it's now being discovered that people who are into these games are resorting to fraud to get other people's assets. And apparently there are extensions for the Chrome web browser that are being, given out to help you play the game faster and better that actually will empty your inventory of assets and transfer them over to the... So even in the virtual world, the gaming world, they're out there just stealing. Apparently, the Royal Melbourne Hospital had a problem. Their computer system is still using Windows XP, and for very good reason. But they got infected by a virus, and they're in utter chaos, and nobody knows where the virus came from. May have even come from Redmond, because they're desperate to get everybody onto Windows 10. How dare you use an operating system after we can't make money off of it anymore? How dare you do that? Over in Germany, their high court has ruled the Facebook Friend Finder is unlawful, calling it a deceptive marketing practice to try and build marketing information by analyzing your friends and looking for parallel interests. Now, you remember all the way back when that whole Lois Lerner thing came out about how Obama was using the IRS to go after his enemies, the same that Richard Nixon had done. And... well, they've got another one on their hands. Apparently, there was a case where the IRS was dealing with questions of having spent a huge amount of taxpayer money hiring an outside law firm that really wasn't qualified to be doing what they were supposed to be doing as much as the IRS's own existing internal employees. And there was a big investigation just how this $2.2 million a year contract got awarded. And there was a court order to preserve all the evidence, but golly gee shuckies, we accidentally erased the hard drive of the person in question. Golly, we're sorry. Really, we're sorry. And if you don't accept our apology, you're going to be audited every year for the rest of your miserable life. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a couple of phone calls. Doug in Ontario. Aloha, Doug. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Michael. Thanks for having me on. In regards to police being trained in Canada by the Israelis, it's been going on, to my knowledge, since the mid-'80s. Generally, it's senior high command, but it goes on municipal, it goes on federal. I can't speak for the two provincial forces.
Well, I mean, the idea that the cops confiscated this pregnant woman's car in the middle of cold winter, she's pregnant, made her walk, didn't even give her a ride to home. I mean, that's not to protect and to serve. That's to grab the money. And unfortunately, Canada, like the United States of America, the government is in such terrible financial shape that they're pillaging the people. Here in the U.S., I mean, civil forfeiture is multiple billions of dollars every year taken from the American people who have committed no crime whatsoever.
Absolutely.
It's all about you may be a drug dealer. You might be money laundering. You're doing something suspicious. It's pre-crime. Right out of the movie Minority Report. They're arresting you without you having actually done something. And that, of course, is not due process. It's a complete violation of the Bill of Rights. A trained dog is not due process. I'm sorry.
Yeah, up to, you're absolutely right.
Okay?
Yep.
All right, thanks.
Have a good one.
Thanks a lot. We're going to switch over here to Bob in Massachusetts. Aloha, Bob. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, hey, aloha, Mike. I think the Republican Party after 2008, what happened with the popularity of Ron Paul, which they were terrified of, they realized that they were desperately fractured. So if you look at how they were going to get somebody in the White House as a Republican, I think what they're doing now is they're using Donald Trump as what's called a takeaway. So it's like they're talking about him, and we both know that any publicity, even bad publicity, is good publicity. They won't stop talking about him, but they say, oh, but you can't have him. You can't have him. It's called the takeaway, Mike. It's a very sophisticated
Well, I disagree with you. I disagree with you. I think the GOP leadership, you remember they made him sign that thing that if he was not the nominee, he would support the nominee and promise not to run third party. That's inconsistent with your suggestion. No, Donald Trump is another populist outsider the way Ron Paul was. And they're trying to give him the Ron Paul treatment. Anyway, listen, thank you for the phone call and your opinion. I'm going to let you go here. We're running out of time, and I got a bunch of stuff to cover. First of all, I want to skip on down here and talk about this ninth planet. Now, this has nothing to do with claims about Nibiru or anything else here. The reality is this has been around for a very, very, very long time. In fact, years ago when I was working at the Table Mountain Observatory, somebody came up and said, we think we've found the 10th planet. And we actually devoted a couple of nights taking pictures of a certain part of the sky trying to identify it. Now, what is going on here, and it has been going on all this time, is if you monitor the orbits of the planets very carefully, you will find that there is something that is slightly distorting the orbits. Something is exerting a gravitational influence on our solar system that we don't know about. And every once in a while, somebody will run a calculation and say, we think it's here, or we think it's there. And even in the news story, they said they predict it'll be found sometime in the next 5 years. And we've had these predictions before. We know something's out there. And it could be way, way out there. I mean, the theory that binary star systems could not have planets has now been disproven by finding planets around one member of a binary star system. And it may be that our sun once had a companion star that exploded, which explains why the outer side of the moon looks like it's been shotgunned. And that core, that dark core, is still out there, tinkering with the orbit. So it's interesting, and I hope they find it, but this may be somebody just grasping desperately for some additional funding, because we have been through this before. All righty, now then, getting on to human-caused global warming. We're coming up on a commercial break here. And I think we're going to go ahead and close the phone lines because I got a bunch of stuff to get through before the end of the show. And let me tell our control room tech that we're shutting off the phone lines here. So we're going to take a break for commercials. When we come on back, human-caused global warming. They're still out there trying to salvage this whopper of a lie that the world is getting hotter, it's broiling, and it's all your fault, and you will atone by paying a carbon tax. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're talking about human-caused global warming. And as you know, the East Coast is about to get Winter Storm Jonas. And the closer it gets, the more alarming it looks. Weather Channel is out there saying this is going to be a bad one. And they're talking about, we're starting to see in the corporate media, a potentially epic winter blockbuster. And of course, this is causing panic in the ranks of the carbon Nazis, because they've been out there celebrating the fact that winter was a little delayed getting started because of the El Nino current, which is caused by undersea volcanoes just over that away a bit. And it's particularly embarrassing for NOAA and NASA, who are still out there taking the official position that 2015 was the hottest year in recorded history. NOAA is still being grilled by Congress over just how they came up with their report that there's been no pause in global warming. And NOAA refused to turn over the raw data, the methodology, and the internal emails saying they had to protect the integrity of the scientific process, which is absolute nonsense. You protect the integrity of the scientific process by making everything available for reproducibility. If there's no reproducibility, it isn't science, it's propaganda. And we have these people from NASA and NOAA saying, well, you should believe us. We're government agencies. We're not like, Yeah, you work for the government that told us all Saddam had nuclear weapons. You work for the government whose president only earlier this week said that anybody who thinks the U.S. economy is in trouble is spouting fiction. And this is just more of the same. They're saying 2015 was the hottest year in recorded history. No, some of the 1930s were warmer. They're just out there trying to sell this. And here's where it gets even more bizarre. The U.S. Department of Agriculture is spending almost $150,000 in a propaganda campaign to convince America's farmers who have a skeptical view about human-caused global warming that they're wrong and the government's right, and they should let the government come on in and tell them how to run their farms in order to save the world from human-caused global warming. Usually that comes down to, you should shut your farm down and sell it to Monsanto, because corporate farming is far more environmentally friendly and efficient than your family farms and family ranches. And they're really getting out there on a limb, trying to convince everybody that the earth is in danger and it's all the fault of human beings. Over at PatriotRising.com, they have an article making fun of a new study that claims humans have been warming the earth since caveman days. That agriculture, growing our own food, was warming the planet. And they're still out there trying to pretend that changes in solar output have absolutely nothing to do with climate here on Earth, or the slowly changing shape of Earth's orbit. Their entire dogma is that if we humans were not here, the Earth would be an absolute unchanging ball. And that's nonsense. The fossil record, geologic record, show climate always changes. It always has, it always will. It was changing dramatically before humans got here. It'll go on changing dramatically after we're gone. This is classic politics. Take something that happens naturally, declare it a crisis, and offer to sell everybody a solution. And we're not buying. And so they're out there just trying to push this because they didn't get the money they needed from the Obamacare disaster. They need the carbon tax. If they can't convince creditors they've got a new source of revenue coming from the American people, nobody's going to loan them any more money. Because they've run out of gold to collateralize government borrowing with. They're running out of lands to collateralize government borrowing with. And where their theory has broken down is imagining that there's still more money out here in the hands of the American people that they can take. And there isn't. And that this storm, if it's as bad as some of the forecasters are saying, will hopefully be the nail in the coffin of human-caused global warming. I'm sure Al Gore is already out there on the East Coast with a flamethrower. He's going to be melting that snow as it comes down out of the sky. I don't know why he cares. He's already made a huge amount of money off of this scam. Why doesn't he just retire, take his wealth, and enjoy it? But no, he's got to have more. He's a money junkie. And nothing makes a money junkie more orgasmic than finding another way to take money away from you and not have to give you anything real in exchange for it. Now, as you know, there has been a growing awareness of the medical benefits of cannabis, marijuana. There's a class of chemicals, cannabinoids, and they have serious positive medical benefits. And Big Pharmaceutical is looking at that. And they're saying there's a potential for some really positive medicines coming out of there, but there's a slight problem. Meaning that you can grow this stuff in your backyard. You don't need to go get a note from a doctor. You don't need to go to a pharmacy to buy it. And so what Big Pharma is doing is basically a repeat of how they came up with Valium, the tranquilizer, because Valium is made from the same base chemical that you find naturally in valerian root. And what Big Pharma did was change a molecule around in order to make a new molecule that they could put a patent on and charge what they wanted for it. And then they mounted a campaign to try and get the natural valerian root banned. Didn't succeed, but that was the idea. We don't want you getting your own medicines from nature. We're going to block that all off. It's illegal. You cannot have it. You will buy your stuff from us. So, they've come up with a new drug, Marinol. It's produced by Solvay Pharmaceuticals, and it has a nearly, but not exact, identical molecular structure as the tetrahydrocannabinol molecule in marijuana. And it has similar effects on cancer patients in regards to mitigating some of the disastrous side effects of chemotherapy. But Marinol does not grow on a bush in your backyard. You have to buy it from a pharmacy. So far, so good. Except in the first tests, it's proving to be deadly. The first test of this synthetic altered marijuana pill has left 6 people hospitalized in Rennes. One of these people has been declared clinically dead for a brief interval last week. Oh, but it's okay because we're making money. And as long as we're making money, you know, this is a good thing to do. Now, the other day, we saw this article over in Mercola.com about how WebMD, which is considered one of the most popular medical information websites on the Internet, is actually a shill for Big Pharma and Monsanto. And as a matter of fact, you never see anything in WebMD that is critical of vaccines or GMO or glyphosate. And reinforcing that revelation of an online shill, Natural News ran this article reminding everybody that WebMD was promoting Obamacare, for which they were paid almost $14 million to sell that to you. Got to follow the money. And we know what a disaster Obamacare has been. Speaking of Obama disasters, along with Obamacare and solar power and all the rest of it, electric vehicles. Back in 2008, Obama set a goal of getting 1 million plug-in electric vehicles on the road by last year and backed it up with billions in subsidies for the developers of electric vehicles. And basically, it didn't work out. There's only about 400,000 electric cars been sold. It's another epic Obama failure. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the last segment of our program today. And a listener just sent me this very interesting article out of Huffington Post. And it seems that the Department of Justice has officially wagged their finger at the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration because they discovered the DEA had recruited a TSA security screener to search bags for cash that the DEA could then confiscate under civil forfeiture. And what's significant is this TSA screener wasn't looking for illegal drugs, just for the cash. That the DEA could say, we think you might be a drug smuggler, and therefore we're going to take the money. And obviously, we're we're seeing an out-of-control system with civil forfeiture. The police, the government agencies are stealing more money, more valuables from you, the American people, than all the street criminals are. The street criminals can't even begin to keep up. This is not law enforcement. This is pillage. You remember the legend of Robin Hood, where Sir Guy of Gisborne's men would just roam the countryside, helping themselves to chickens and pigs and coins and the farmer's daughters. We're there. We're there, where the police are just helping themselves to anything they can find in our pockets under the flimsiest of excuses. How did we allow ourselves to be so degraded to where what we laughingly call law enforcement are the biggest criminals on the streets right now? Where they can come up and say, I think you're going to buy drugs, therefore I can take your money. I think you're laundering money, therefore I can take your silver and gold coins. I think maybe you were running moonshine, so I'm going to steal your car. That's where we are. We're almost ready for a new Robin Hood. Anyway. Dark times indeed. Okay, China has announced they're going to attempt a moon landing. And to make it interesting, they're going to land on the far side of the moon. All of the Apollo landings were obviously on the side of the moon facing the Earth. Landing on the far side is a little trickier because there is no direct contact between the landing site and the Earth. There has to be a relay satellite up there as well. But anybody who's studied the moon understands the far side and the near side are very, very different. And most of the, in fact, all of the near side landings were on the more flat areas, except for the last one. And that's a very different geology. So China's going to go on the back side and see what things are like there, scientifically. And I mention this to emphasize something. When the United States was at the top of the space business in the late 60s of the last century, China was considered a peasant country with minimum industrial base. Now the U.S. can't launch their own people into orbit to the space station. And China is an industrial powerhouse, and they're going to the moon. And if you want to see a measure of the decline of the United States of America under the gentle caresses of the private central bankers and the money junkies, that's it right there. We're witnessing the decline and fall of the American empire. It was strangled to death by the bankers. Down in Mexico, there's a bit of a conflict going on. Monsanto is out there demanding they be allowed to plant GMO corn in Mexico, which I think ought to be up to Mexico and the Mexican people and not Monsanto. And there's a tremendous concern over 59 indigenous corn varieties that are at risk of being contaminated or exterminated when the corporate corn comes on in. And Mexico and the indigenous people take a great deal of pride in their variety of maize products, corn products. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the economic section, Monsanto has terminated 16% of its workforce because GM sales are continuing to plummet. Monsanto is in a rush to get their GMO everywhere so that they can't take it back. Because once your field is contaminated with GMO pollen, you either have to burn it or let it lie fallow for 3 years to kill that pollen. And if your crop that you're growing on your land shows up Monsanto genes, they will sue you and take your farm away from you. It's agriculture imperialism, trying to do to the world with corn what the Federal Reserve tried to do to the world with the U.S. dollar, make everybody dependent on the U.S. system. Now, there's a warning article coming out of Global Research up in Canada showing that there is far more harm associated with consumption of glyphosate than thought. As you know, it's been listed as a probable carcinogen. And apparently it also disrupts mitochondrial function in cells. which in turn leads to many degenerative diseases and chronic health conditions, including autism, Alzheimer's, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, type 2 diabetes, Parkinson's, and obesity. But hey, we're making money selling this stuff, and that makes it okay. That's all that matters in the United States of America is making money. Profits. Profits above all. Profits uber alles. There are limits. Now, as you know, the weeds have evolved to tolerate glyphosate. And Monsanto knew this was going to happen when they were selling Roundup Ready corn and Roundup pesticides. Their own studies had shown a few years down the road, the Roundup isn't going to work against the weeds anymore. They'll become glyphosate tolerant. But that's okay. We're going to have a new product, Enlist Duo, which is a blend of glyphosate and Agent Orange. I mean, over in Vietnam, the people are still dealing with the after effects of Agent Orange. It was actually tested at the UH Manoa, and a couple of students died in a tragic lab accident. There are still parts of the Big Island on the military reservation that are fenced off. You don't dare go in there. Half a century after the testing, it's still too toxic to go in there. And apparently the EPA finally looked at all that information and said, yeah, even for our loose standards, it's too toxic. And the EPA has now revoked the approval of this Enlist Duo, combining glyphosate with Agent Orange. Finally, some common sense out of the EPA. They've gone down a very dangerous path of constant escalation of genetically altered pesticides and plants, and the nature which is going to evolve to adapt. That's the part they didn't tell anybody about. You buy our stuff, it's going to be wonderful. But yeah, in a few years, the insects and the weeds are going to evolve to tolerate glyphosate. Or the BT toxin. That's happening too. And so these farmers are now stuck. They have to buy these very expensive seeds from Monsanto year after year after year after year, and still pay to dump all these toxic chemicals to kill the weeds and insects on their crops. The American farmer got screwed. Scientists have revealed an entirely new state of matter called Phase 5 hydrogen. Hydrogen's kind of an interesting material. Under intense pressure, it actually becomes metallic. And there are some planetary scientists who think the core of Jupiter is largely made up of metallic hydrogen, which some research says that if it could be kept metallic out of the pressure, it might actually be a room temperature superconductor. Wouldn't that be cool? I mean, a zero loss power transmission, totally frictionless bearings. What a revolution that would be if they could send hydrogen into its metallic form and keep it there in open air, open room conditions. That would truly be revolutionary. All right, there's the music. Time for me to get out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. We'll be back tomorrow, Thursday, here on the Genesis Communication Network. Until then, stay informed, stay skeptical, make good choices. Take care of yourself and your family. We are on the verge of significant change to the way our lives are lived. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.